The Very Serious Crafts podcast is on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/seriouscrafts to support our podcast, find out about our Patreon half-stitched episodes, and more.
Hello, and welcome to Season 4, Episode 7 of the Very Serious Crafts podcast. I'm Molly from Wild Olive.
And I'm Katie Greenbean.
And I'm Haley from Red Handled Scissors and the Bones and Bobbins podcast. Today, we'll be talking about the portable delight that is English paper piecing.
Yes, I'm very excited about this. But also,
Me too.
before...
That's what I should be doing right now.
Oh, yeah. You could be doing that right now.
I could. My travel kit's behind me.
There you go. But before we start heading down that, another delight that I wanted to share with everyone, the two of you and all of our listeners, is that I have been upping my dad joke game around my family. And it is thanks to, I think it's Fit Dad CEO on Instagram, which is a really interesting account to follow, as I am neither fit nor a dad nor a CEO. But
is this person actually all of those things?
I think maybe. Definitely he's got like some like dad fitness things going on. But he has taught me I know, but he has taught me where I should store all of my dad jokes. Do you know where I should store my dad jokes?
No.
In the database.
Oh dear.
The database. Sorry. We like dad jokes around here. I just had to. I had to. That's all.
I love a good database. All right. Before we jump into talking, we want to give a shout out to our serious friend of the Very Serious Crafts podcast who is supporting us at patreon.com/seriouscrafts. Many thanks to Cheryl. You're the best.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you, Cheryl.
So, shall we talk about English paper piecing?
Oh my goodness, yes, please.
Yes.
Because I love it. It's
Me
maybe
too.
one of my favorite. I think it's my favorite non-work specific, like extracurricular craft.
Good description.
And it's one of the only things that I can allow myself to do and not turn it into work.
Mm-hmm.
I
we
feel
all
that.
need more of those crafts in our lives.
Yes.
Yes.
And let's be clear, that's because I don't ever finish any projects.
Familiar.
That is definitely one of the downsides of English paper piecing is that it can be a hard to finish type of craft. Unless
but then
it's all
that
you're
could
doing.
that could be one of the plus sides as well, that it is a perpetual project.
That is true.
Indeed.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, I definitely know people who have, like, you know, the embroidery floss organizer, like bobbin holder containers?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I know people who have those just filled row after row.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that feels familiar. Well, mine is diamonds, but I have one of those containers that it's larger than the floss boxes, so it accommodates the shape that I have, and yes, there are many, many diamonds in there.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Are we assuming that everyone listening to the Very Serious Crafts podcast knows what English paper piecing is? Because this English person didn't know until fairly recently.
Yeah, that's true. We did make that assumption because maybe we've talked about it before, but
okay, so
that could be inaccurate.
I'm new
to
here,
assume.
and even though I have done some English paper piecing, I'm still not entirely sure that I know what it is, because I've also heard of foundation paper piecing. I don't know what that is, and I don't know what the difference is.
Yeah, so English paper piecing versus foundation paper piecing.
Yes.
The biggest difference is English paper piecing is almost exclusively a hand sewing endeavor, while foundation paper piecing I've only ever heard of doing with a sewing machine. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah, I think so. I guess I have done foundation piecing, but not in its purest form.
Yeah. So foundation paper piecing, you have a paper printed template with all of the different elements or, shapes that you will sew together to make a quilt like something.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a form of quilting. Both of these are really. And you take the pieces of fabric and you layer them together and put them behind the paper and you sew over those lines so that you can have like really accurate sewn, especially small pieces and odd shapes. And you don't have to worry about cutting things really precisely and having really accurate seam allowances because it just kind of handles it. And then you tear the paper away and reveal this thing. And you usually work like from the center and work out and it builds and it's amazing. And I've done a little, like one tiny thing of it. And it's the people who design those patterns, I can't wrap my head around. But we're talking English paper piecing, in which you take paper templates and attach them to fabric in some way temporarily. You fold the edges of the fabric around the templates to give yourself these nice crisp shapes. Then you stitch those pieces together and remove the papers, generally. Not always.
Okay.
Yes? Is this a good working definition?
Yeah, I think so.
All right.
I'm going to blame him.
There you go.
For all of this. My gigantic black cat has caused chaos. Well, he's napping.
Are you sure it wasn't my tiny black dog while he was napping?
Well, it also might be my not dissimilarly colored other cat, also named Jack.
There you go.
They are actually very similarly colored. My Jack and your Jack.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Anyway, I don't remember where we were. English paper piecing.
English paper piecing. So,
we were talking about Molly having a stash of diamonds.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. There you go.
So you've got a box of
I've got a box of diamonds.
And I definitely have a pouch filled with hexie flowers. That have no purpose.
And Katie, being the newbie, you have none of these.
I have a pouch.
Okay.
Okay, what's in your pouch?
It's a good start.
Three octagons.
Ooh. That is a bold first shape.
Is it?
I will say.
Is it? I've only done octagons.
I think most people start with hexagons.
Well, I didn't want to be like most people.
Well, I think that's fine. I've never done an octagon.
I will say, I think Mel, is it Gedrich?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think so.
When she did her quilting podcast, I think they started with squares.
They did start with squares, and I've also done some squares, and now I understand why squares are a little more complicated, because they're corners.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there's a lot of surface tension.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and lots of extra
complications.
Like, flappy, like extra fabric at those corners.
Yeah.
Oh yes, but you can fold them in nicely at a point. That must have a name. I don't know what it is though.
Well, on the Mel Gedrich podcast, they were calling them hospital corners, which they definitely aren't. But
no, but I see what
I make my bed with hospital corners.
Yeah,
that is not what that is.
In fact, hexagons come closer to hospital corners in the angles that you get going there. I think
that's true.
Yeah. All right. So I clearly did not look at what we had written down as things to talk about in regards to this until this moment. And Katie, your notes here are excellent. I like what you have to say here. Would you like to share with the listeners?
Sure. So, despite knowing Molly for a great number of years, I think it might be 10 years, it might even be more, I finally both started and finished my first English paper piecing project in the past week.
Ooh.
It was a cushion cover, and I don't know if this is how people normally approach their English paper piecing projects, but I made it up. So I cut the templates myself based on a design that I had in my head. And I used tweed fabric, so scraps of tweed that I had left over from dressmaking. So I used quite a heavy card rather than a paper, because folding thick tweed around a piece of paper is not going to be fun.
No, I usually use cardstock, so I can just use them over and over again.
Me too.
But what I learned from Molly's Instagram this week is that you could maybe use a bit of glue to temporarily stick your fabric to your paper and help hold it in place while you are basting it.
Water-soluble glue sticks.
I did not know that, and I did some very kind of gymnastic hands to try and hold tweed in place while I folded over corners and stitched it and made it all stay where I wanted it to.
Because you said you didn't even pin it in place, did you?
Nope. I just held it there.
That's actually really impressive.
Thanks.
I mean,
well, that you did tweed also.
Yes.
Like, you picked a difficult fabric, you made it up, like the design, and then you neither pinned nor... I mean, you could have even basted the center if you want to.
I mean, I could have
but it didn't. So I'm impressed. And it's the one that you posted on your Instagram, right?
It is. Now, all of this is to say that any of your listeners who maybe have not tried English paper piecing, I think it's a totally great craft that you could just throw yourself in the deep end with, even though you've never tried it before. It was a lot of fun. And you say that tweed wasn't an ideal fabric, but it did kind of mush into the corners really easily. And I'm not sure if that statement will make sense to anyone who hasn't done English paper piecing. But
if you have done English paper piecing, then you're like, ooh, it's going to mush into the corners really easily.
No, that's true. Just for the record, for anyone who might be interested in trying English paper piecing, I have done an extremely detailed with photo step outs, and I think also GIFs sometimes, of the entire process of English paper piecing. I used hexagons in my tutorial, from pieces of paper and fabric all the way to a completely finished English paper piecing travel kit that you can take along to do your English paper piecing.
Yes.
So
go to Haley's site for that, because it's excellent.
Where presumably I would have learned that I could have used such tools as a bit of basting or some glue to help.
Yes, you certainly would have learned about glue. It's funny that, like, just thinking about my first English paper piecing projects, I was taught English paper piecing by Diane Gilliland, and people might... I mean, she's a recognizable name.
Literally wrote the book on English paper piecing.
Yes.
Literally.
I'm in that book.
I didn't know that, by the way.
Yeah, you know, the scarf with hexagon piecing in pinks and grays is me.
Okay.
She designed it. I made it.
Yeah. And the book is, for listeners, is called All Points Patchwork. And if you are at all interested in English paper piecing, just go on Amazon and order it right now.
It's amazing.
It's the best. I use it as like a textbook.
Yep. I can't think of a better resource that I've found. And I mean, I wrote an exhaustive tutorial, but it has nothing on just the breadth and depth of knowledge in Diane's book.
Yeah.
And the projects are so good. And if you have been in sort of the crafty world or even the podcasting world for a while, Diane used to have a podcast called Crafty Pod, and it was one of the very first craft-related podcasts. So if her name sounds familiar, that might be why. And so she taught me because I, for reasons somewhat unclear, was in Portland, Oregon. Oh, it was back when I worked in book publishing. It was for the Public Library Association trade show, I believe. And it was in Portland. So it just so happened that at that time, so many of the big names in crafting all lived there. But I really wanted to learn English paper piecing because Diane talked about it pretty frequently. And so at this little coffee shop, this small army of crafters all took over an entire section and sat there for hours just hanging out, crafting, and teaching each other skills that we didn't have.
Amazing.
And so the thing that I learned was English paper piecing, and since that moment, I just haven't stopped. It's such a soothing... Anybody who likes sharp corners and really precisely measured things, and I really do, English paper piecing is such a soothing activity.
Yeah. I love the shapes that you can put together in different ways, and how, I mean, the geometry of it all is
yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah.
And during that time, because English paper piecing was sort of returning to popularity in the craft world at that time as well. And so, all of the big die cut machine makers were making English paper piecing dies that cut both fabric and paper at the same time, which was really cool. And I still have a bunch of those, and I have a couple of different AccuQuilt machines that also are set up to do that kind of thing, so you can get really precise things. And it just makes my heart happy.
See, and this is interesting because I, of course, like my paper pieces, or I also use cardstock. I can't think of when I've ever used... No, very, very early on, I used paper. And then I quickly learned that card was better. But I like those...
You just don't want to cut out over and over again if you can make a reusable.
Not to mention the paper, it is harder to get it nice and tight. You can still bend that paper, right?
Much harder.
Which, okay, just an aside, because I love this detail, that historically, and Haley, I'm sure you know this, but when women would make English paper piecing quilts, they would use catalog pages or magazine pages because they were reusing that paper. And so one of the ways that you can tell the age of an antique paper pieced quilt is a lot of times they would leave the papers in. And so those old quilts will have a rustling sound from the paper still being in there, which I think is just fascinating.
Oh yeah, it's really cool. I've seen some at the American Folk Art Museum. There, many years ago, was a quilt specific exhibition, and there were quite a few hexagon specific English paper piecing projects, like Grandmother's Flower Garden or any of the 5 million names that particular quilt design has. And some just straight hexagon quilts. And they were made by soldiers.
Oh, cool.
Because I believe Civil War soldiers. Mm-hmm. Because there were like worn fabrics and scraps, and they were cold. And so there's a whole history of that as well. And I would imagine that they must have some fascinating paper inside them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, in a similar vein, a lot of times I see people, and I've done this as well, where, you know, you save extra pieces of cardstock, or like, you know, the little postcards that will come in magazines or whatever, that you can just use those as your cardstock. Yep. Similar to using magazine pages, but a little more sturdy. And what I was going to say was, I like the precision of using, you know, well-cut cardstock pieces, but I'm a little less fussy in my seam allowance cuts of the fabric.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I can go back and forth on that. It depends on what I'm going to be. I guess it depends on whether or not I'm photographing it.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
In process.
Uh-huh.
But also, sometimes I am really precise, and sometimes that's not as important.
Yeah.
And traveling, anything that I've made, like, actually not sitting in my studio space isn't as precisely cut.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But, it's my favorite. I love it.
So, you know, going back to the gluing, I will have like a stack of templates, and I pull out my glue stick, and I like stick the glue stick down onto the template, which picks it up, and I put a little dab of glue on there, stick it on my fabric, and then I repeat that and put a whole bunch of them, and just kind of try to space them as evenly as possible, and then I cut them all apart in one big grouping.
Mm-hmm.
Goes pretty fast, I have to say.
Yeah, that's true. And I've definitely done that as well. Do you have a favorite hand quilting thread that you use?
I use Coates & Clark hand quilting thread.
Me too, most of the time. I also, there are a couple of, I mean, I don't know, they were just Brooklyn hipster bait, really, at the craft store. But there's a brand of hand quilting thread, and the labels have long since disappeared, so I don't actually know what they are, that still come on wooden spools that are stiffened with beeswax to make it more easy to tie knots, and to make it a bit more sturdy.
Yeah.
And those are really pretty and really fun, but I gotta say the Coates & Clark hand quilting is not as excuse me, not as neat looking, but really gets the job done.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always been happy with it. Katie, what kind of thread did you go for when you stitched yours together? Now that we're offering our expert opinions.
I went for whatever was lying around in my sewing box. I didn't know that there was such a thing as specific hand quilting thread. So
it's a little bit heavier.
Yeah.
So it's stronger, so those seams that you're piecing together don't rip easily.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I'm going to have to attend to my dog.
Okay. Oh.
I like that there's a dog appearance today.
Me too.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that the thread that you used will be just fine. And also, how is Jack?
Jack is lovely.
Okay, good.
Jack can't see a podcast without wanting to be on it, so.
Well, that's fair.
Yeah.
I mean, Jack is the star of, well, I guess the co-star.
No, he's the star, let's be honest.
Okay, fine. Dogs always win.
Yeah.
Jack just doesn't realize this is audio only. And,
I know.
He's going to have to say something if he wants to really be in here, but it's okay. We won't encourage that too much.
I don't know. Is there anything else we need to talk about?
Yeah,
I want to ask why it's called English.
Okay. I have the answer.
Good.
Oh, good, because I don't.
I mean, I don't personally just know this off the top of my head. I looked this up because full disclosure, I don't just carry this information around in my head. Although now I will. Now I will. So this is I've found this on the website sewandquilt.co.uk. It says English paper piecing is the traditional time-honored technique of quilt making by hand using paper templates, thought to date back to England in the 1700s. And that's when the hexagon pattern came about. It became popular in Europe and the U.S. during the last quarter of the 18th century, when all things English became highly fashionable.
Of course.
And that's why they think the name English paper piecing was coined. So
wait, the 18th century?
Last quarter of the 18th century. Yes. So late 1700s.
Like when we were fighting the Revolutionary War?
Yeah, that's when it but maybe, yeah, I don't know. Like that's the last quarter would be exactly that time.
Yep.
That's what I'm saying.
But that's what they're saying on this. So I mean,
fine.
Yeah. Maybe they I don't know. I would have thought at that point that the Americans would have been ditching that, but
well, they ditched the monarchy.
Yeah.
I guess they just
keep the parts they liked.
Ditch the style.
But yeah, this says that is just one thought on how the name English paper piecing was coined. But but it is in fact, it did originate in England. So there you go.
Well, that's also another reason for it to bear that name, I guess.
Yes. But maybe it at that point was just paper piecing, or it was also sometimes known as mosaic patchwork.
Cool.
Yeah.
So
I mean, that sounds fancy.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And also is a really, really good excuse for tossing together things that don't match in a way that doesn't make sense because it's art.
Yes. There you go. Yes. Okay. Let me get your opinion on this, Haley, especially. Before I at this point, by the way, as you're listening to this, we've had a number of stops and starts on this episode. I literally have no idea how long this episode is right now. So we could be going long or short. I don't know.
Long. The answer is long.
I know we've been recording a long time, but I don't
that
know
is a fine point.
How much is episode at this moment. So
Biggie, no. Leave Jack alone.
This is incredible. This is incredible. This is the season of anything can happen.
I think it must be me.
I don't know, unless that was you meowing.
It wasn't me meowing.
Yeah, so have you Haley ever done the glue basting where you actually use the glue stick or a glue line pen around the edges to hold your seam allowance down? And if so, what are your thoughts? No, okay.
No, because I don't. Biggie, stop growling. Because I don't finish projects quickly enough to trust that the glue won't get brittle and detach.
Okay.
If I were doing so, you know what? Actually, I did do it once. Although I definitely lied about it in the tutorial. At my giant hexagon lap quilt, the seam allowance, I did actually baste it, like stitch it through the center because the hexagons were like the size of my head.
Yeah.
But I believe I reinforced that basting with glue to keep everything tight.
Okay. That makes
I don't
sense.
know. Have you done it?
I have tried it only a little bit, and I found it to be sticky. I ended up the glue, I just couldn't contain it enough, I think. Maybe if I'd had like a really thin glue line pen, but I was just using little edges of the glue stick, and it was too much glue. I
need a detail glue stick.
It sounds to me like something that, like, it sounds like it would be a quick and easy solution, but actually it ends up being more hassle than it's worth.
Yeah,
I think it takes less time.
But it takes more time.
Corners.
It takes more time to remove the papers, though, because you have to peel the fabric off all the sides too. You know.
Oh, I just punch a hole in the center and pop them out with a crochet hook.
But it pulls at the seam allowances too much. I've found.
So, I think that at the corners, I purposefully wiggle my needle to not get the corners, to not stitch through the corners.
Oh no, it's not the stitching through the corners. It's the way that the glue holds on to all of your seam allowances.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I see
Not at the seams, but the folded over bits. So, because a lot of times I'll have people ask me about it, and I just don't particularly care for that method so much. So I'm officially publishing
I feel like that would
in this
just
form.
Yeah, I don't want to be that sticky.
Yeah.
And also, you don't always wash quilts.
Right.
Like, sometimes you do, but sometimes they aren't made for use in the way that other blankets might be. And so if you're not going to wash them, that tackiness is going to attract like dust and dirt and things like that.
Yeah. We don't want that.
I don't know. I'm making up reasons. I just don't like it.
Okay. That works.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other important things that we should be discussing in this? Favorite joining methods? I don't know.
What stitch do you use to join?
Whip stitch.
Okay.
Yeah. What is? Yeah. I
have used blanket stitch.
Ooh, interesting.
Or no, the invisible hemming stitch.
Yes.
Mattress stitch.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Ladder stitch.
Yeah.
Ladder stitch.
Yeah,
ladder stitch is what I'm thinking.
Or sometimes slip stitch, depending on which medium you are working in.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
True.
I have used that. I have used running stitch. Catching.
I've never
both.
used running stitch.
It makes a bulkier seam, which sometimes is okay.
Yeah.
Other times not so much.
I'm usually going for invisible seams, but I always reinforce the corners. I always do 2 stitches, very, very close together at the corners.
Mm-hmm.
But my stitching is also notoriously tiny and notoriously precise.
Mine too. And in fact, I've talked with Becca of Hugs Are Fun about this because she does or has done a fair amount of English paper piecing as well, and we talked about the number of stitches that we will put into an inch as compared to what a lot of other people do. And sometimes we look at it and we're like, are we really like, is this mega overkill? Maybe. Are we going to change? Probably not.
I will say that the one project that I didn't do that with was the giant hexie lap quilt, and at least one seam has given out.
Ah.
So, and I mean, it's also bulky, but it's not that big. It's a lap quilt.
Yeah.
So I feel pretty justified.
I now also feel justified.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel duly warned.
Yeah, I was going to say, now we're going to judge you. Approximately how many stitches were you putting in your... You can do centimeters if that would be more pleasant for you.
No, do you know what? I did it all in inches.
My stitches are about 1 millimeter apart.
Okay. And
yeah, I was a little bit more relaxed than that.
Okay.
But yours also isn't going to get, like, it's decorative.
Yeah.
So
that was one of the things we talked about
Mhm.
when Katie was making decisions about certain things here, and I was like, it's a cushion cover.
Yeah, it's not
be fine.
Yeah.
It's not going to have loads of wear and tear, and it's not going to be washed or anything like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
No, and the fabric has sort of almost a protective fluffiness that quilting cotton doesn't have.
Mhm.
well, yeah.
So you can't see the seams. I mean, you can see where they are, but you can't see the actual stitching.
Yeah.
So it's,
But also,
I think
wool,
it's-
like,
yeah.
makes friends with itself. What are the words
Yeah.
I'm looking for?
Um,
The fibers will mesh together, and it will
there.
help itself to reinforce the
It
seams.
felts.
Yeah.
That's the one.
Well, I wasn't gonna say it because as we were talking,
What is it? The cuticle opens
Yeah.
and interlocks.
Yeah, I may have said to Katie, I wonder what it would be like if you were to intentionally felt your finished English paper piecing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Could be
I-
interesting.
Imagine that you wouldn't want to have that stitch density then. You would want to have significantly more space since the fibers are going to contract upon
Yes.
each other. So
Yeah.
I think you would end up with some weird puckering if you had as many stitches per inch as we tend to have.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I think that would look really cool. And now I want you to try it, Katie.
Oh, don't worry. I fully intend to try it.
Okay.
Excellent.
All right.
Thank you.
Good. All right. I feel like this should be last call for this episode. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
I feel like we have... This episode just needs to be allowed to go to the light.
Okay.
Well, it's just that, well,
Yeah. We're not
I
going to
guess
say too much.
we're going to leave it. Oh my goodness. All right, so I'm going to usher it in that general direction at this moment.
All right. Thank you.
Yes, so thanks for listening to the Very Serious Crafts podcast. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Serious Crafts and on Facebook at Very Serious Crafts. You can also find show notes and all things Very Serious Crafts at veryseriouscrafts.com. And finally, if you're a fan of the Very Serious Crafts podcast, which honestly, if you're still with us at this point, you definitely are, please leave us a 5-star review on whichever platform you use to listen to podcasts. Good ratings help us show up in recommendations, which helps more people who love crafting find us. And for the record, for those of you who may be considering leaving a review, the Very Serious Crafts podcast is a crafting comedy podcast.
Yes.
Just to clarify.
Uh-huh.
Okay. We love you.
Yeah.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.